architectural feature of the building itself, being built into or onto one of the walls. Adjacent to the ark and facing the congregation was seating for the presiding officers of the synagogue and any distinguished guests. Mount 23. 6. The reading of the law was done from an elevated platform, traditionally located in the center of the synagogue. Around the three sides was seating space or benches for the audience, possibly including a separate section for women. It seems that the orientation of the building was considered important, an effort being made to have the worshippers face Jerusalem. Compared R6. 10. Program of worship. The synagogue served as a place for instruction, not sacrifice. Sacrifices were made only at the temple. Synagogue exercises appear to have consisted of praise, prayer, recital and reading of the scriptures, as well as exposition and exhortation or preaching. The giving of praise featured the Psalms. Prayers, while taken from the scriptures to an extent, in time came to be long and ritualistic and were often recited for pretext or show. Mr. 12. 40. Lu 20. 47. One element of synagogue worship was the reciting of the Shema, or what amounted to the Jewish confession of faith. It received its name from the first word of the first scripture used, "Listen Shema, O Israel. Jehovah our God is one Jehovah." The 6. For the most important part of the service was the reading of the Torah or Pentateuch, which took place on Mondays, Thursdays, and each Sabbath. In many synagogues, the law was scheduled to be read entirely in the course of 1 year. In others the program took 3 years. It was because of the emphasis on the reading of the Torah that the disciple James could well observe to the members of the governing body at Jerusalem. From ancient times Moses has had in city after city those who preach him, because he is read aloud in the synagogues on every Sabbath. Act 15. 21. The Mishnah Megillah 4. 1, 2 also refers to the practice of reading excerpts of the prophets, known as the Haftarahs, each with its exposition. When Jesus entered the synagogue of his hometown Nazareth, he was handed one of the scrolls that contained the Haftarahs to be read, after which he made an exposition upon it, as was the custom. 4. 17-21. After the reading of the Torah and the Haftarahs, together with their exposition, came preaching or exhortation. We read that Jesus taught and preached in the synagogues throughout the whole of Galilee. Likewise Luke records that it was after the public reading of the law and of the prophets that Paul and Barnabas were invited to speak, to preach. Mount 4. 23. Act 13. 15, 16. Paul's preaching. Following Pentecost of 33 CE and the establishment of the Christian congregation, the apostles, particularly Paul, did much preaching in the synagogues. When entering a city, Paul usually went first to the synagogue and preached there, giving the Jews the first opportunity of hearing the good news of the kingdom, afterward going to the Gentiles. In some cases he spent considerable time, preaching for several Sabbaths, in the synagogue. In Ephesus he taught in the synagogue for 3 months, and after opposition arose, he withdrew the disciples who textoi acute miritra longo, Syndic 1052 similar to synagogue procedure. 1 Co 14. 31-35. 1T2. 11, 12. Synagogues had presiding officers and overseers, as did the early Christian congregations. Mr. 5. 22. Lu 13. 14. Act 20. 28. Row 12. 8 synagogues had attendants or assistants, and so did the Christians in their form of worship. There was one called the sent one or messenger of the synagogue. While finding no counterpart in the historical record of the early Christian congregation, a similar designation, angel, appears in the messages that Jesus Christ sent to the 7 congregations in Asia Minor. 4. 20. 1T3. 8-10. Re 2. 1, 8, 12, 18. 3. 1, 7, 14. Among other respects in which the synagogue served as a precursor of the Christian assemblies are the following. The local synagogues recognized the authority of the Sanhedrin at Jerusalem, even as Christian congregations recognized the authority of the governing body at Jerusalem, as Acts chapter 15 so clearly shows. In neither were collections taken, and yet in both provision was made for contributions for the assembly and its ministers and for the poor. 2 Co 9. 1-5. Both also served as courts. The synagogue was the place where minor cases involving Jews were heard and disposed of. And so also the Apostle Paul argues that Christians should let the mature ones in the congregation judge matters involving Christians rather than go to worldly courts to settle such differences. 1 Co 6. 1-3. While the synagogue arrangement made provision for the administering of stripes, in the Christian congregation such punishment was limited to rebukes. Similar to the arrangement for Jews in the synagogue, in the Christian congregation the severest measure that could be taken against the one professing to be a Christian was that of expelling him, disfellowshipping or excommunicating him, from the Christian congregation. 1 Co 5. 1-8, 11-13. See Congregation. Expelling.